Hey folks, this is Kalani. We have some large buffs and nerfs in this week's PTR update, which is becoming even more important to keep an eye on because patch 10.2 is almost here. There are also various changes to raid gear, how it's going to drop, how many tier pieces we're going to see, and a very interesting change to the very rare items that some bosses have on their loot tables, and patch 10.2 finally has a release date. So there's a lot to talk about, let's break it all down. Now before we jump in, be sure to hit up that like button and subscribe so you never miss another video. Let's kick things off with those class changes, starting with the Demon Hunters. There are a few talent changes and bug fixes at the top, and then for Vengeance, retaliation damage was increased by 50%. There are a few talent changes in here. Fiery Brand duration was increased, Shear and Fracture damage were both increased by 10%, Soul Cleave damage is up 15%, Spirit Bomb damage was increased by 8%, Soul Barrier Absorb was buffed up by 25%, Fell Devastation damage was increased by 30%, Stoke the Flames was reduced slightly, and then there are some bug fixes in there for good measure as well. Now we did have some additional tuning changes come through later in the week, so these are separate notes from the initial round of changes, but I'll include them where appropriate for each class. So the first last minute addition was for Demon Hunters, who saw an 8% damage nerf to Immolation Aura, Sigil of Flame duration was increased by 2 seconds, and the Demon Hide magic damage bonus was reduced down to 4%. Druids have just a couple of changes this week. There's a bug fix for Balanced Druid's Mastery, which seems very important to get fixed before this patch goes live, and then Guardian saw a quick buff to Blood Frenzy as well. For the monks, Escape from Reality is now a 1 rank talent instead of 2, there are various bug fixes for Brewmaster, and Mistweavers have some tuning changes as well. Vivify and Invigorating Mist healing are up 12%, Expel Harm's healing is reduced by 40% in PvP combat, the Ymir Drasil 4 set was changed, Feline Stomp's damage and healing was increased by 100%, Bounce Back will trigger after taking 12% of your health as damage, Unison was nerfed down to 50%, and Life Cocoon can no longer be cancelled. Moving on to the Paladins, Holy has a few more nerfs. Reclamation only refunds 10% mana cost down from 12, Holy Shock's mana cost was increased, and the 4 set was reduced by 10%, but it can stack up to 6 times instead of 3. Disc Priest saw some changes with those last minute updates too, including a 9% damage nerf, but a 9% atonement healing buff to help offset it. Purge the Wicked is up 5%, and Shadow and Pain damage was also buffed up by 10%. Now before we continue, today's video is sponsored by Albion Online. Albion Online is an award-winning cross-platform sandbox MMORPG set in an open medieval fantasy world and features a player-driven economy where nearly every item is player-crafted. Instead of a traditional class system, your armor and weapons dictate what spells and abilities you can use, giving you ultimate freedom to build your character however you want. Challenge yourself with intense PvP combat in the open world, or track down the most powerful beasts to obtain the rarest of materials to craft yourself some amazing gear. If you need a break from the carnage, you can build and maintain a farm on your very own private island, cultivate crops and animals for extra resources to help out your guild, craft some better gear, or to sell on the marketplace for some extra currency. October 16th brings Albion Online's highly anticipated next content update, Wild Blood. This update introduces a host of fantastical creatures to Albion. There are also brand new shapeshifter weapons, allowing you to take different forms to bring a new element to combat in Albion, and a brand new open world feature, Tracking, that lets you track monstrous foes across regions to earn special new rewards, with some unexpected encounters along the way. So use the link in the description to start your Albion Online adventures today. Now getting back to the video, rogues have quite a few changes to go over this week, starting with a nerf to Vigor, the energy regen bonus was reduced down to 5 and 10%, and several other general talents were adjusted up there at the top. For Assassination specifically, there's another change for Indiscriminate Carnage, Poison Bomb is going to work with Caustic Spatter, Kingsbane initial damage will crit when used with Cold Blood, Internal Bleeding can be used with Mouse over Macros, and Dragon Tempered Blades will correctly apply Numbing Poison. For Outlaw, Killing Spree self-damage is now reduced during cheat death, Crack Shot will work with Sepsis and will correctly trigger between the eyes for all stealth conditions, and Taken by Surprise adjusts properly based on stealth as well. Outlaw rogues did get one other last minute nerf with the last minute additions this week, a 6% reduction to all of their ability damage, so that is going to be a 6% nerf across the board. And then we round things out with subtlety here. They saw some changes to Ephemeral Bond, Replicating Shadows, Shadowed Finishers, Shadow Techniques, Dark Brew and Sepsis to make sure they're all working as intended. Shamans will see a lot of changes to their set bonuses this week. Elemental 2 set and 4 set are getting nerfed by the looks of things, as well as a bug fix thrown in for good measure. Restos 4 set was buffed up to 20% and Chain Heal had its mana cost reduced slightly. And then Fury Warriors have a very quick change to Storm of Swords, which will give Slam a 9-second cooldown instead of 12. And Arms Warriors were also caught in those last minute additions, but theirs are all buffs. 10% for Mortal Strike and 10% for Overpower. That rounds out our list of class changes for this week, and we don't have too much longer to wait for these changes to actually make it into the live game. This week's PTR build was labelled as a release candidate, which would usually have us speculating when the patch could launch, but we can skip over all that nonsense because we finally have an official release date for patch 10.2. The patch should hit live servers on November 7th, so pretty much all of the recent predictions were correct, which means it's going to be just after BlizzCon, which will be an interesting series of events. We'll learn all about the next expansion, probably, then backtrack a bit and have to work through 10.2 until we get to the point where the story progression makes sense, and then we'll probably start heading towards whatever the next expansion is. Or we could find out about a patch 10.3 at BlizzCon, have the same deal with doing 10.2 first, but I kinda doubt we'll get another major patch in Dragonflight at this point. Either way, 10.2 will release on November 7th, so we only have to wait a little bit longer to see all of these class changes and the brand new content hit the live game. Now moving on, we have a couple other changes in this week's PTR build, like some very important changes to raid gear, specifically how raid gear drops and the chances of getting certain types of items. The items that will see changes going forward are tier set pieces and items marked as very rare in the raid journal. The tier set change is very straightforward. For the latter half of Season 2, so the season we're currently in on live servers with the Aberrus raid, tier sets had a lower chance to drop in the Aberrus raid. The general thinking here was that most folks probably have their tier set bonuses, so having them take up a large portion of tier boss loot tables actually made it harder to get some of the more useful items. Tier set pieces are only useful until everyone has their 4 set. Past that point, they're almost worthless as drops outside of trying for tertiary stats or sockets, so less tier drops is a good thing when everyone has their tier, right? Well, the lowered drop rate will actually stay lower as we head into Season 3 and Emir-Drasil. The current drop rate is about 1 to 3 when you look at tier gear versus other loot, so when you have 20 people in your raid and you get 4 pieces of loot, you should get 1 tier piece, and then the 3 other pieces should be non-tier drops. Now you might think this would be a massive nerf to tier set acquisition in Season 3, but we might not need the drops from bosses. We have so many ways to get tier gear in Season 3, especially with the Revival Catalyst opening up in the very first week. So we have the Revival Catalyst on week 1 and we'll get 1 charge every 2 weeks, so 1 guaranteed piece of tier gear every 2 weeks via the Catalyst. Completing the Season Mastery achievement by either killing the last boss on Heroic or getting up to 2000 Mythic plus score, whichever comes first, that also gives you a guaranteed tier piece. The last boss of the Emir-Drasil raid also drops Omni tokens, giving us more chances to fill in specific gaps, and then we'll also have more chances to get tier gear from the weekly vault. So even though we're going to have lower rates of tier gear dropping from boss kills, I still think we'll be able to get our 4 set bonuses faster in Season 3 when compared to previous seasons of Dragonflight, so keeping the drop rate low might actually be better to give us a higher chance of seeing other special items like trinkets. To kind of put this into perspective, as it stands right now, if you are a higher end PvE player who will achieve AOTC relatively early or get 2000 Mythic plus score in the first month or two, the very latest you will get your 4 set bonus is on week 5. That will use 3 Catalyst charges and the Season Mastery achievement token. If you're on the lower end and you're not going to get that Season Mastery achievement early on, then you'll have to wait until week 7 to get that extra Catalyst charge. These timelines rely on 0 luck. This is guaranteed, so this is the very latest we'll have the 4 set bonus active and equipped. Most folks will get theirs much earlier than that due to the various other sources of tier gear. That time frame also goes for anyone who doesn't do high-end group content. You only have to wait until week 7 to get your full 4 set collected, which is way earlier than previous seasons when you consider that the catalyst didn't even open up until week 6 in most cases, so in previous seasons you would only have 2 tier pieces in the same time frame, assuming you do 0 content that can reward you with tier gear directly. So it's actually going to be faster for everyone, meaning the tier drops from Raid just aren't as valuable anymore. The other big change to Raid loot comes in for the very rare drops, which are typically special weapons, rings or trinkets. Some example of these items from the Aberrus Raid are the Screaming Black Dragon Scale from the first boss, the Class Trinkets from Echo of Neltharion, and the Cloak from Sarkareth. All of these items were marked as very rare in the Raid journal, so this is the kind of item we're talking about. In the Yggdrasil raid, it looks like we'll see some very powerful items in this category as well, including weapons and trinkets, so I'm sure a lot of folks are going to want to get their hands on these specifically. The major change for this kind of loot in 10.2 is that it will now have a chance to drop in addition to everything else. So a very rare item might not take up a loot slot from that boss's drops, it can drop as an extra item. That's a very interesting change and ultimately means we'll have more loot to look forward to when you get lucky enough to see these very rare items drop. The drop rate for very rare items should also be more consistent across the board when they can just drop as an extra item, which is always nice as well. And then to round out this video, we have even more changes coming for crafted gear, but this time it's actually sort of good news. The item level of crafted gear has been bumped up by 3 item levels across the board, which basically brings it back up to a level of value that it would have held in previous seasons when compared to other sources of gear. For an easy comparison, this now puts the highest available item level of crafted gear at 486, up from 483, which is on par with an item that is 3 of 4 upgrades on the myth track, up from 2 of 4 on the myth track. So basically it's just 1 bump up, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it means that crafted gear is that little bit closer to being on par with the best gear available, which means it's more worthwhile to spend your time, gold and effort into actually getting it crafted. The same goes for the lower tiers of crafted gear, with them being just a little bit higher item level, they match up against other sources of gear better. Now sadly, there are some nerfs coming through at the same time, so it's not all good news. Crafted gear just couldn't catch a break. All of the new Season 3 enchanted crests that you need to create the higher tiers of crafted gear have become more expensive in the latest build. Even the Whelpling crest that is used to create the higher item level of non-spark gear in the new season. I guess it was all just too cheap. So enchanted Whelpling crests will cost 30 of your crests, up from 15, the worm one is going to cost 45 crests, up from 30, and then the enchanted aspect crest is going to cost 60, up from 45, so all of them are going to cost 15 crests extra. So while crafted gear item levels are now a bit higher, they will also take more resources to actually create, so you're going to have to weigh up whether it's worth spending your crests on getting crafted gear to a higher item level, or to upgrade your other gear to a higher item level instead. With a lower cap on crest farming in Season 3, that could actually end up being a very difficult decision. But that's all of the changes we have for this week, so that's it for this video. What do you think of these changes to crafted gear? Does the higher item level make it more enticing for you to get some stuff crafted, or does the higher crest cost make it not worth the investment anymore? And what are you most looking forward to in the new patch and season? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon and to all our members here on YouTube. You can see the names floating by on screen. If you'd like to add your name to the end of every video with a special shout out at the start of the next video, you can find links in the description over to Patreon or click the join button just below this video. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another video. Thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.